Well, thank you. It's good to be here today to provide another update on Vericel, as we had a good discussion early this morning during the plenary session. So I'll remind you that this presentation contains forward-looking statements, and you should refer to our information on file with the SEC for further information. So Vericel is a fully integrated cell therapy company. We develop, manufacture, and market autologous cell therapies for the treatment of serious diseases and conditions. We have a robust commercial business that has strong revenue growth, and we have a number of near-term and longer-term drivers for the company. So as I mentioned this morning, we began our commercial efforts in 2014 when we purchased from Sanofi the Genzyme cell therapy and regenerative medicine business. And at the time, the business was slowly declining, doing about $40 million in revenues. And our first order of business was to turn that business around, build a foundation for future growth of the company. And I think the team has done a pretty good job in that regard. We ended 2016 with about $55 million in revenues, so a good growth rate with a mature product portfolio. But at the same time, we were really focused on generating additional growth drivers for the company going forward, and that's what I'll talk about today. Number one was getting MACI approved, which is a next generation cartilage repair product, and then getting a pediatric label expansion for Epicel, which allows us to continue to invest in and grow the company. And those initiatives are starting to pay off. We reported our second quarter earnings results in August, and revenues were up about 32%, clearly driven by the momentum of our MACI launch. We also have a very strong shareholder base. We've raised about $40 million after we bought the business, $20 million after MACI was approved, and really brought in a great group of fundamental institutional healthcare investors into the company. At the same time, we've built a management team that has deep expertise and experience in developing and commercializing products in the U.S. and around the world. So we think we've transformed Vericel into a very exciting company. So through these activities, this is our portfolio. So MACI, again, is a product for the repair of cartilage defects in the knee. Carticel had the same indication and is being replaced by MACI. Epicel is a permanent skin replacement for severe burn patients. And we have a phase 2 development program, Ixmyelocel-T, for the treatment of advanced heart failure due to ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy. So I'll start with our cartilage repair franchise. So cartilage is a highly specialized connective tissue of the synovial joints. So it provides a smooth, lubricated surface for nearly frictionless movement, transmits loads to the underlying bone, and protects against compressive and other forces of the joints. And chondrocytes are the resident cells that are responsible for manufacturing or producing and maintaining cartilage. So articular cartilage injuries are a significant cause of musculoskeletal morbidity. There are approximately 60% of knee arthroscopies identify a cartilage defect. And the damage is caused by either acute or repetitive trauma, degenerative conditions like osteoarthritis, or inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. And the issue is that cartilage does not have an inherent ability to repair itself. It has no blood vessels, no lymphatics, and no nerves. So once you have an injury, you kind of set off on a path towards further degeneration, loss of function, osteoarthritis, and ultimately partial or full knee replacements. So the way these defects are treated is really, they fall into three buckets. The first is palliative treatments. If there's some frayed cartilage that's causing inflammation or pain, you go in and you clean that up, and it provides some temporary pain relief. For smaller defects, there's a procedure known as microfracture, where you basically drill into the subchondral bone. The bone marrow bleeds into the cartilage defect, which you should think of as like a pothole in a road. It forms a fibrocartilage scab, so it provides some pain relief, may be effective in small lesions, but durability of repair is an issue as it ends up failing after about 18 months. So the true restorative procedures are products like MACI and Carticel. So MACI, as I mentioned, is a third-generation autologous chondrocyte implant product for treatment of cartilage defects in the knee. It's the first tissue-engineered cellularized scaffold product approved by the FDA last December. It was also the first tissue-engineered advanced therapy and medicinal product approved in Europe in 2019 or 13. And the product consists of a patient's own chondrocytes seeded at a rate of about 500,000 to 1 million cells per square centimeter onto a resorbable collagen membrane. So the implant is placed into a patient's knee. The chondrocytes migrate to the subchondral bone where they produce the hyaline-like cartilage that's naturally present in the knee. So the production process starts with a biopsy during an arthroscopic assessment. The biopsy, which is about a tic-tac size piece of cartilage, is sent to our facility in Cambridge. We isolate and expand the chondrocytes. And again, we seed the chondrocytes uniformly onto this collagen membrane, which is delivered to an orthopedic surgeon's suite. The defect is prepared. The defect is then templated. The membrane is cut to the size of the defect and implanted with commercially available fibrin glue. So it's a very fast and simple procedure. So there are 4 product attributes that we think will help us to grow our cartilage repair franchise. So Carticel, which again we had through the end of last year, did about $40 million in revenues. And it was kind of a niche product for a couple of reasons that I'll discuss. First of all, it was a second-line therapy. It could only be used after a prior failed procedure. It was only indicated for defects on certain portions of the knee. So again, it was a very technically demanding procedure, which I'll share in a moment. So the first expansion opportunity with MACI is that the label is vastly expanded compared to Carticel. So it's a first-line indication now. It's indicated for use for defects anywhere in the knee. There's no limitation on the size, location of defect, whether it's with or without bone involvement. So what that does is open up this as a viable treatment option for a much larger number of patients. Second is the ease and simplicity of administration. If you look at a Carticel procedure on the left, it was a very technically demanding, time-consuming procedure that involved an open knee arthrotomy. By label, you would take a periosteal flap off the shin bone, microsuture it in place, and then inject the cells, which again would adhere to the subchondral bone and start producing cartilage. So, it was used by a very small number of orthopedic surgeons. We typically get biopsies from 1,000 surgeons a year. About 350 to 400 would actually do a Carticel implant. It was essentially your really top-tier cartilage repair folks, top sports medicine docs, your professional sports team doctors, and so on. But again, it was used even though it was a difficult procedure because it worked. We have durability of repair data out to 20 years for patients who were treated with Carticel. So MACI addresses a lot of these issues. As you can see on the right, it's a much less invasive procedure. It's administered via a mini arthrotomy. You simply cut the membrane to the size of the defect, glue it in place, and you're done. So it's about a 20-minute procedure in the single defect cases versus about an hour to do a Carticel procedure. So what this does, the label expands the patient pool population. This is expanding the surgeon user base. Thirdly is the clinical data with MACI. There is no other product that's demonstrated statistical significance versus microfracture, so it's the only product out there with this type of data. The product was approved both in Europe and the US based on the SUMMIT study, which was a landmark study of 144 patients that demonstrated statistically significantly greater improvements in pain and function scores at 2 years versus a commonly used procedure of microfracture that I described earlier. Likewise, the response rate was about 90% with MACI and about 67% with microfracture, which means that within 2 years, about a third of your patients are coming back for another surgery if they've been treated with a microfracture procedure. When you look at time to improvement, we saw improvements as early as 36 weeks on the pain and function score, and those were maintained at 1 year and all the way out to 2 years in the initial double-blind portion of the study. There was also a 3-year extension study, so patients could voluntarily enroll into an extension study. And what we saw was that after 5 years, those early improvements that we saw were maintained all the way out to 5 years. So there's no other product certainly on the market now, nor do we believe in development that will have this much data when they hit the market. So this is clearly an advance in the treatment for these patients. And then finally, the rehab protocols are very important. And you really, when you're treating these patients, they're signing up for a 6 to 9 to 12-month rehab. And we typically treat younger, more active patients who want to get back to their activities of daily living, get back to their sports activities, et cetera. And the improvements with MACI was approved outside the United States, both in Europe, Australia, and other parts of Asia. Upwards of 10,000 patients were treated, so there's a lot of data out there, and more aggressive rehab protocols were used outside the United States. And you can see that you can get back to full weight bearing with MACI after 6 weeks, as early as 6 weeks, versus 12 for Carticel. So it accelerates that rehab, which is a very important aspect from a patient perspective. So we think all 4 of those attributes will help grow our cartilage repair franchise. And there's a big market opportunity. There's more than 750,000 cartilage repair procedures that are done in the U.S. each year. About 40 to 50,000 of those involve these larger full chondral defects of the type MACI is intended to treat. When you take into account that most of our patients, again, are young patients with commercial insurance or military personnel, and you kind of take a cut there, take a cut for age, we think there's probably 10 to 15,000 patients a year that comprise the addressable market for us. And we've typically treated about 1,000 patients, so it's a very market expansion opportunity for us. In order to capitalize on that, we've made a lot of investments. We expanded our sales force by a third, added a lot of medical affairs and marketing personnel to take advantage of this opportunity. And based upon what we've seen in terms of the interest of surgeons who never used Carticel because of the procedure, we're planning a further sales force expansion for 2018. We've provided a number of online tools for our patients and surgeons, and we think we are setting the standard in terms of customer engagement and support for patients and surgeons. As I mentioned, our second quarter results were great. Revenues for the company were up about 32% versus Q2 the prior year. Our customer base has fully switched over from Carticel to MACI. The last Carticel implant was performed on June 30th. And really the leading indicator for us in terms of MACI implants is how many biopsies are we receiving. And we're seeing very strong growth. Biopsies were up about 23% in the second quarter, and that's accelerating. And the encouraging news for us is that about 50% of those biopsies are coming from new surgeons, and the increase is driven by, about half of the increase is driven by biopsies from those new surgeons. So again, we're seeing a breadth of interest from orthopedic surgeons. Of our initial 300 plus surgeons that were trained, about half of those were non-Carticel users. And importantly, as we talked about earlier today in terms of commercialization, having those medical policies updated is important. We had a very focused strategy on how we could convert Carticel medical policies to MACI. I'm happy to report that with United Healthcare this weekend updating its policy, we essentially now have the same number of covered lives for MACI in terms of commercial plans that are covering the product as we did with Carticel. So a very quick transition versus the normal 12 to 18 months it takes to get medical policies in place. So very encouraged about MACI. Our second product is Epicel, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a permanent skin replacement for full thickness burns greater than 30% of total body surface area. It's the only FDA approved epidermal product that's available for these severe burn patients. And it's really an amazing product. As I mentioned, the only alternative for catastrophic burn patients is to do autografts, where they will take a layer of skin with a dermatome, run it through a mesher, and try to cover the wounds to prevent infections. And that's what results in sort of that chicken wire appearance you see with these severe burn patients. So it's a really important product. It's produced much like MACI, where we take a small biopsy, a 1x3 inch biopsy of healthy skin from these patients. It is sent to our labs in Cambridge. We isolate and expand the keratinocytes, which are the predominant cells in the skin. They end up forming a sheet that's 2 to 8 cells thick. And we apply a petroleum gauze to that, put the grafts into these carrier dishes. It is hand-delivered to burn centers around the country, so you might get on a plane and see 2 boxes of Epicel along with one of our couriers. At the burn centers, after the wound bed is prepared, the grafts are removed. They're administered to the patient. 7 to 10 days later, in what's known as a takedown procedure, you take off the petroleum gauze and the new skin is exposed. So again, it's a remarkable product, and it's remarkable to think that you can take a 1 by 3 inch biopsy and 3 weeks later have enough skin to cover a patient's body. So last year, as I mentioned, we received a pediatric label expansion for this product and really focused on the survival data that I mentioned this morning in the label. And this was very important to the FDA. So the patient data, clinical experience database that's included in the label shows an 87% survival rate for patients that are treated with Epicel. And again, we're treating patients who have upwards of 70, 80, 90% total body surface area burns. And it references a clinical study in there, the Munster study, where survival for Epicel-treated patients was 90% versus 37.5% for patients treated with standard care. We presented this data at the American Burn Association meeting, and when you look at it by burn decile, you see there's a marked improvement in survival rate for patients that are treated with Epicel. So like MACI, we're just kind of scratching the surface. When we bought this business, there was one sales representative that was working out in the field on behalf of Sanofi. We brought the promotional efforts up to kind of what they had been historically. We've brought volumes of the product up. We more than doubled sales in the first couple of years we had the product. So it was really just kind of getting the promotional effort back up to where it needed to be. So we saw some really strong growth early on. Now the next leg of the journey for growth is really taking the best practices at certain centers of excellence and making sure that's replicated around the country, because there are, half a million burns in the U.S. each year. About 40,000 patients are hospitalized. There's at least 1,500 a year that fall within our label. We've been treating maybe 60 patients a year when we picked up the business. So there's a lot of patients who really could benefit from this product, and we're making sure that we invest to bring the product to them. So same sort of thing. We increased our promotional efforts, brought MSLs and medical affairs folks on board so that we can go out and work with these institutions, and really focused on peer-to-peer training to make sure best practices are adhered to across the country. So my last slide relates to Ixmyelocel-T. So this is a treatment that has been in development for the treatment of advanced heart failure due to ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy. This is a product that has an orphan drug designation. We received a fast track designation in February for the product and a regenerative medicine advanced therapy designation in May of this year. Last year, we announced positive results in our phase 2b Excel-DCM clinical trial that showed a 37% reduction on the hard clinical endpoints that the FDA wants to see in the pivotal trial of deaths and cardiovascular hospitalizations. The results were published in The Lancet. They were presented at the late-breaking clinical trial session of the American College of Cardiology. At that time, we said that we were going to focus on our commercial business and making sure we were investing to grow that business, that we did not plan to conduct additional clinical studies on our own, but that we would talk to partners and pursue expedited regulatory pathways. We did meet with the FDA this past Friday on the 29th regarding the opportunity for accelerated approval for this program, given that it has the REMAT designation. The FDA obviously is very interested in working with us on this program in designing a phase 3 study and so on, and recommended that we should plan on conducting at least one additional well-controlled study to support filing the BLA for the product. As I said, our strategy is really like many companies. You have to decide what you're going to invest in, and our plan remains that we're going to invest in our commercial business, and we're not planning to conduct additional clinical studies unless they're funded by a partner. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. Again, we're really excited about the commercial opportunities, the strength of our business given the momentum from the MACI launch, and look forward to presenting further results on our Q3 earnings call. So with that, I'll ask if there's any questions.